Hey Canucks fans, is the Pacific Division the weakest division in the NHL? I'm Clay Emo. I'm at Canuck Clay on Twitter. I'm at Clay Emo on Instagram. I'm the founder of the GLCPC, the Good Looking Canucks Positivity Club. And this is my Canucks take, all in one take. It's Clay's Canucks commentary for Thursday, January the 23rd. And I think this topic is relevant for two main reasons. Number one, we're heading into All-Star Weekend, and all the competitions, all the games are based on this premise of division versus division. So it's always cool. It's kind of neat to compare the divisions and the players and the teams in these divisions. And secondly, we know that the Canucks are leading the Pacific Division by 1 point. The next four teams are all tied with 57 points. The Canucks have 58. So you have five teams within 1 point of one another. So it's obviously a very tightly contested division. And I always kind of find it kind of fascinating to see how the Pacific Division stacks up to the rest, the other three divisions in the league. So for those two reasons, the tight standings and the All-Star Weekend, I think it's a great time to talk about this. How strong is the Pacific Division? And right away, I will tell you that I believe it's the third strongest division. So not the fourth, not the weakest, but the third. And we know that there are four divisions. We know that two in the West are the Pacific and the Central. We know that the two in the East are the Metropolitan and the Atlantic. And I will say right now, right off the bat, that I think the order goes Metropolitan, Central, Pacific, and then Atlantic. So let's get into why I think so. Well, it's kind of interesting. You look at the Vancouver Canucks, they are the division leader with 58 points, but that puts them 13th overall in the entire NHL. And by the law of averages, you think that they should be in the top four, right? In a perfect world, I don't know if it's perfect, but you could make a case for the division leaders should be in the upper echelon of the league, at least top 10, if not top 5. But the Canucks are sitting there in 13th overall. The top four of the league is Washington, Boston, and St. Louis. So you already have the other three divisions represented. Washington from the Metro, Boston from the Atlantic, St. Louis from the Central, and then fourth best in the league is Pittsburgh, also from the Metropolitan Division. That's why I'm going to think the Metro is the best. I'll talk about it in a second. So you have number one from the Metro, number two is from the Atlantic, number three is from the Central, and number four is not from the Pacific. Number 13 is from the Pacific. So when you look at the top four teams, three of the four divisions are represented. The Pacific Division is the only one that's not. You look at the bottom six teams, and I said top four because after Washington, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Washington, Boston, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh, there's a small drop-off to the next tier teams of Colorado and the Islanders. Just a small, but there is and Tampa Bay, like Colorado, New York Islanders, Tampa Bay are part of the next tier, and you can see it, right? There's like a 4 or 5 point gap in the standings. On the bottom end, there are six teams that are far and away the worst teams in the league, and one that's really bad in there. So the bottom six include the three California teams, San Jose, Anaheim, and LA, includes New Jersey, includes Ottawa, and includes Detroit. Detroit's kind of in a class by themselves, unbelievably, with only 28 points so far, 2/3 through the season. This is crazy. So of the bottom six, three of them are from the Pacific, and then you have two from the Atlantic and Ottawa and Detroit, and one from the Metro, and no Central Division teams are in the bottom six. So already it's not painting a pretty picture for the Pacific. They have no teams in the top 12 of the entire league, and they have three teams in the bottom six. But then it gets really interesting. When you look at all the point totals for every single team in the league, that's why I think that the Pacific Division is third best. And I'll get into reasons behind all this in a second. But when you look at the actual numbers, Metropolitan Division, number one, they have six teams that have 60 points or more. Six teams. That means if the Canucks by points, I know you got to look at matchups and who plays who, which I'll get to in a second. But if the Canucks were in the Metropolitan Division, they would actually be seventh overall. Yet they're leading the Pacific. So that's crazy. You have Washington, Pittsburgh, the Islanders, Columbus, Carolina, and Philly, all with 60 points or more. So 6 out of the 8 teams in the Metro have 60 points, which is pretty impressive. The only two bad teams there are the Rangers with 50 and then New Jersey with 41. So New Jersey in the bottom 6 of the league. So the Metropolitan Division, obviously the strongest division when it comes to point totals, and you have a lot of star power with Ovechkin, with Crosby, and the like. Okay, so that's the Metro. Second strongest, I think, is the Central, and Central's always been strong, especially compared to the Pacific. But the Central, you have teams like St. Louis with 68 points, Colorado, like I said, in that second tier, and you have Dallas with 58, exactly the same as Vancouver. So you have 3 teams that have the same number of points, at least, as the Vancouver Canucks. So again, 68, 62, 58. Then there's only a small gap, and then the other 4 teams in the Central are all within 3 points of each other. Winnipeg at 54, then Chicago, then Minnesota, and Nashville brings it brings up the rear at 51. So of all 4 division dwellers, the last place team in every division, Nashville is by far the best team at 51 points, because you have New Jersey with 41, you have LA in the Pacific with 41, and then you have Detroit with, like I said, 28 points in the Atlantic. So of the 4 best teams, the 4 division dwellers, the last place team, like I said, Nashville is the best by far, by 10 points. They're clear. So I say the Central is also a strong division, obviously stronger than Pacific, so the strongest team in the Western Conference, but I don't think they're as strong. The Central is not as strong as the Metro because they don't have the same higher end teams, but they are closely, they are closely packed together, especially those bottom 4, those teams that are right now out of the playoff position, but all 4 of those teams could still conceivably battle for the wild card spot. Third place, I'd say Pacific, and you guys know this, Vancouver at 58, then Edmonton, Calgary, Arizona, and Vegas, all with 57. So there, Metro's the strongest with 6 teams over 60. With the Pacific Division, you actually have the second most teams with 57 points or more. That's the 5 teams that I just talked about. But then there's a big drop-off, and you have San Jose with 46, Anaheim with 43, and LA with 41. So you have 5 teams that are pretty good, not awesome. Again, 13th in the league, the Canucks. And then you have 3 that are pretty bad. So that's why I think the Pacific Division is one of the weaker divisions for sure. And I'll bounce back to it in a second. And then you have the Atlantic Division. Sure, you have 4 teams that have 57 points or more. So you have Tampa, Boston with 70, and then you have Tampa with 62, Florida with 61, and our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs with 57. So again, 4 teams that are 57 or more. Then a small drop, and then you have 2 almost there teams in Buffalo and Montreal at 51. And then another drop off to Ottawa at 42, and then another drop basically off a cliff to Detroit with 28. So you have 4 teams that have basically 51 points or less. That's Buffalo, Montreal, Ottawa, and Detroit. And you have 4 teams that are over the 57-point barrier. So if we use this 57-point barrier, which I conveniently use because of the Pacific Division, right? All 5 teams are 57 or 58. Then it goes like this. The Metropolitan has 6 teams at 57 points or more. The Central only has 3. Pacific has 5, and Atlantic has 4. But then you look at the bottom teams, and like I said, the Central Division bottom teams aren't that bad, and the Metropolitan Division only has 1 bad team, New Jersey. Pacific has 3 bad teams, and Atlantic has 3 or 4. So that's why my ranking goes Metro, Central, Pacific, and then Atlantic. Now, there's a lot of things we need to consider. A couple of you, I put a poll question up on Twitter about this actually, and most of you are saying that the Pacific Division is either the 3rd strongest or the weakest overall. So kind of right in line with what I'm talking about. Very few of you said it's the very strongest, and a few of you said it's the 2nd strongest. But the majority of people were either 3rd strongest or the weakest. So kind of in line with what I'm talking about. But a couple of you did point out that Pacific Division and the old Smythe Division back in the day where the Canucks used to play, because of the West Coast nature of all the teams, the California teams and Vancouver, and then Alberta, just 1 province over, you're saying that the Pacific Division has the worst travel. And I agree with that. Everyone in the Eastern Conference is in the same time zone, basically, and it just sometimes it's a quick flight or a quick drive even, whereas Vancouver's always on a plane, flying for at least an hour, to the Alberta's teams, and then more to the 3 hours down in California, so on and so forth, or 2.5 hours. So there is the most travel in the Pacific Division. I agree. Also, a couple other factors. Many of you said that Pacific Division, a lot of the teams have a winning record against their Eastern Conference opponents. So what that tells me is that the teams are so jam-packed because they're basically taking points off of each other, off of one another. So they're taking points off the Eastern Conference, but then in playing each other so much, there's not a lot of separation, and that's why the standings are quite close. Now, I'd say that's a better argument for the Central Division, where the worst team is only at 51 points. So that's a very competitive division, and you guys know you play your own divisional teams 4 or 5 times, and you play the other conference only 2 times, at home and home. So in essence, the Central and the Pacific, both, I think there's a lot of competition within the division itself. So you're never going to go 5-0 against a team, or you rarely will. It's likely going to be a 3-2 split, or a 2-2 split when it comes to teams in your own division, at least in the Central and the Pacific. So not a lot of bottom feeders, especially in the Central, but it also means in the Pacific Division, there's not a lot of teams rising up. So I think that's a good point as well, is because the teams are so close to each other, there's not really, you're not really beating up on a lot of other teams. Where in the Metro Division, you have New Jersey to beat up on. Atlantic Division, you have Ottawa and Detroit to beat on. I'd say Pacific, you have the 3 California teams to beat up on. In the Central Division, there's hardly anyone to beat up on because, like I said, the Nashville is the lowest, and they're at 51 points, which isn't great, but it's not horrible either. So I think overall, it is there's just simply stronger teams in the other divisions. I think travel may have a little bit to do that, but then if the Pacific Division teams are playing each other, it doesn't matter. It's more when they're playing against Eastern Conference teams. But we know that some of the teams, including the Canucks, have pretty good records against the Eastern Conference. So maybe the travel doesn't even factor up. I think overall they're just simply stronger teams, better players in the other 3 divisions, and there's an elite team or 2, right? With the Canucks being only 13th, that means there's like 6 teams from the Metro that are ahead of them in the standings. There's 2 or 3 teams from the Central ahead of them in the standings, and there's 3 teams from the Atlantic ahead of them in the standings. So 6, 3, and 3. There's your 12 right there. So Vancouver 13th overall in the entire league. Canucks fans, what do you think? Tell me why you think the Pacific Division point totals aren't that high. Is it because, like I said, they're kind of cannibalizing each other, they're taking points off each other, and therefore no one's really rising? Is it because they simply aren't as good as other teams in the league? Do you anticipate Vancouver or another team like Vegas, not maybe by the end of this season, but in future years, actually rising to be a top 5 or top 6 team as opposed to a top 13 team? It's really fascinating. And we certainly don't want to make excuses. We don't want to say, we're only winning the division because it's so weak. I think because of some of the factors I talked about, that's not a fair argument. And someone's got to win the division. So, why not the Vancouver Canucks? They're in the best position to do so. They're number 1 right now. Games in hand on almost everyone below them, at least 1 or 2. So now's a really good time to instead of looking at next year or 2 years, 3 years down the road, this year, out of any year, might be the Canucks' best chance to get out of the division, win 2 playoff rounds, depending on who your wild card position is, and then boom, you're playing in the conference final. And wouldn't that be amazing, especially in a season where there were barely any expectations? So there we go. A breakdown. I know that was probably a little bit hard to follow, considering I don't do any graphics or any stats or any insets of pictures, but hopefully that all made sense. If you want, just pull up the NHL standings and look at it while I'm talking. That might help you. Or maybe I painted such an amazing visual for you that you don't need any other external sources. Regardless, let me know what you think of the Pacific Division. Tell me why you think the point totals are so low, and tell me if you agree with me that they are the 3rd strongest division, or is that too low or too high in my ranking? Leave a comment below. I'd love to read, react, and reply. As always, subscribe if you like to, like this video if you like to. Tomorrow I will check in with some reflections from my All-Star experience last year in San Jose, and of course previewing what I expect from the Canucks over the next couple days in St. Louis. Have a great day. God bless. Go Canucks, go.